Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Public Works Finance and Safety Committee meeting for Monday, February 1st, 2021. Roll call, please.
Albertson,
Here.
Bueller. Bueller absent. Hoyer,
Here.
Oline,
Here.
Lalum,
Here.
Manti,
Here.
Rademski,
Here.
Roby,
Here.
Billhauer,
Here.
Y.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. Have a motion by Holine and a second by Rademski. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 4 is public input, and this is the time set aside for anyone that would like to speak on a topic that isn't on the agenda. If you want to speak on a topic that is on the agenda, I suggest you please wait until the agenda item comes up. Is there anyone that would like to speak online? Just say request permission to speak, if so. See no one, we'll move on to item 5, approval of the agenda. Have a motion by Billhauer and a second by Roby. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 6 is the regular agenda. A is approval of a quote award for the 3rd Avenue Northeast Culverts Replacement, project number 1929, to LL & Sons Excavating, Inc. in the amount of $34,701.75. Have a motion by Holine and a second by Lalum. And I will ask Public Works Director, City Engineer Heath Von Eye to tell us about this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor, for the introduction there with the item. This is related to the flood mitigation efforts from the 2019 events that the community observed in 2019. As we all recall from 2019, there was a lot of early in the year, there was a lot of spring runoff and flooding events that happened, and then high water conditions throughout most of the year in 2019. With that came some FEMA funding to help mitigate some of the flooding damages. This project is one of the projects that were deemed eligible for that FEMA funding. It's taken us a little while to get it before the council to follow up with a project just based on contractor availability. The FEMA application and paperwork is all in place, and they've agreed to partially fund this project, I believe to the tune of up to just over $30,000. And we've put out a request for quotes to perform the work. It's essentially to replace the 3 culverts that exist on 3rd Avenue Northeast. This location, if I get my GIS pulled up here, is northeast of the Dakota Commons area, if you're familiar with that subdivision, and is, I'll share my screen for context here to those on Teams. So here on my GIS map, we have 19th Street running north and south where my cursor is. Then we have 3rd Avenue Northeast running east and west. This is the Dakota Commons subdivision. And the culverts in question here for this project are located right here, where our city tract, our drainage tract that we've purchased some time ago to help manage and control some of the runoff from this area of town. Our drainage tract connects to and then extends beyond 3rd Avenue and further south on down. But the culverts in question run underneath 3rd Avenue. These have been in a little bit of disrepair from previous years' observations, but the events of 19 kind of put them over the edge as far as needing to be replaced. So this contract will replace the 3 existing culverts with 3 uniform reinforced concrete pipes, RCP pipes, And after putting it out for quotes, the Parent Low contractor, LL and Sons Excavating, has submitted a favorable bid to us, and the staff is recommending proceeding to work with them on the project. Justin Peterson has helped put a lot of this together, has communicated heavily, frequently with FEMA, along with the finance office, and we'd be glad to help answer any questions that the council might have.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Comments about it? None? It's an important safety improvement, so I'm glad it's getting done. Not seeing any questions, so I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Okay, item B is approval of the professional services agreement with Infrastructure Management Services for work associated with the Pavement Management System update, project number 2107, in the amount of $120,426, authorizing the mayor to sign all applicable documents. The motion, I didn't catch who that was. Lalem? And second by Helene. And I will again ask Public Works Director Heath Von Eye to tell us about this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This project relates to our pavement management system, our pavement management program that we established back in 2017. We entered into a contract with IMS. That was partially funded by the state through one of the DOT programs, and that they help administer. What that project in 2017 did is established a citywide pavement management program and an assessment of all the city streets within the city limits. In a nutshell, what the assessment does is provide a pavement condition index, and then also recommendations for roadway repair and treatment for different types of roadway classifications. And it prioritizes those list of road repairs for us in an Excel spreadsheet fashion, and has been a steering document the last 4 years now for the projects that the street department and the engineering department have worked together on in selecting where we're performing our mill and overlay, our street reconstruction projects, and things of that nature. So it's customary, once you establish a pavement management program like this, that you update the data about every 4 to 5 years. And that's what this contract will do. It's circling back with the same consultant, IMS. They've given us the proposed services outlined in their agreement here that they would perform to update our pavement condition indices for all the streets throughout town. They would take into account the work that we've done the last 3-4 years, and any additional deterioration that has occurred the last 3 or 4 years to reassess, establish and update the pavement condition indices, and then update that project priority list that I spoke about. And again, which is a very good steering document that's utilized by staff in determining where our CIP monies go in relation to street rehab. I will note there are a handful of additional services that are outlined in this contract. The base contract is, I'll just share my screen here while I talk through these quick so everybody knows the numbers. So the base contract, just to update the pavement condition indices, more or less, and provide us that updated spreadsheet, is about $57,000. The original contract to establish the pavement management program back in 2017 was roughly $80,000. And again, a good portion of that was paid for by state funding that we received. So a $57,000 update's not too bad of a cost for the amount of work to plug in and update the system. Additional services that they've proposed include that spreadsheet is Easy Street Assessment, an ESA. That's the spreadsheet of the recommended street improvements in a ranking or a prioritization type list. And what they're proposing is that they can link that up to our GIS system, our mapping system, and give an all the more robust and user-friendly platform for staff to utilize this information from. That's to a cost of $9,000. They're also proposing a deflection testing for collectors and arterials. This is essentially provides us a structural analysis of the collectors and arterials that would help with the prioritization of any work on them, but also with the selecting of the right type of treatment for the roadway. What we don't want to do is get into spending a lot of money, like for instance on a mill and overlay on a collector or arterial, when in fact that the structural soundness of the road is not adequate, and our mill and overlay just ends up going to pieces in a premature fashion in a lot less years than we would hope to get out of it. So that's what that deflection testing does, that they proposed for us to do on our collectors and arterials. Again, that's to the tune of just under $16,000. They would also provide some GIS cleanup services, some miscellaneous GIS, along with the coordination and syncing of that spreadsheet, but also the getting the street network pavement management system plugged into the GIS mapping, which is currently on there now, but this would help just clean it up, make sure everything's accurate. They provide a functional classification review of our street networks, and they would also provide right-of-way asset data collection for pavement markings and signs. Now, this is one I'd like to talk just a moment in detail on with the council, if just to share the logic here. Staff feels that there would be a benefit to adding these two components to our asset data management. And, you know, we could utilize the pavement markings layer on our GIS map in a pretty systematic way for maintaining those. This information comes in handy whenever there's mill and overlay type projects or any work that occurs and we want to put the striping back in exactly how it was. We've got a record of that. It's all right there on our GIS mapping. There's that use for that. And then the signs as well, to have a sign database throughout the town. What Rob does now, and the sign signal technician, is they do tag each sign. There's an inventory of each sign in this location. But this would help put it into a mapping perspective to know and address all the signs throughout the network. It would identify their location and then have at our fingertips the maintenance or replacement of them with a database like this. Now, this one is a little spendier. It does come to the tune of a little over $34,000. So all these additional services total $63,000 over and above the base cost of $57,000. So the contract before the council tonight is for the full $120,426. It was budgeted through last year's budgeting cycle for 2021 to the tune of $121,000. So we are within budget. But I was just going to offer up that if the council were interested in whittling back these costs a little bit as a cost-saving measure, one of the first ones I would probably point to would be the pavement marking and sign database by foregoing that. With all that being said, there might be a few questions on this. I'd be glad to help answer any questions. I know Rob's on the line, Justin as well.
Thank you, Heath. I did have a question about the functional classification review. What does that entail?
Yes, great question. And Justin, are you online, or is the I believe the consultant's online with us too. If they could help elaborate a little bit on some of these services, that'd be great.
I can, Heath. This is Jeff Myers with IMS. How is everyone?
Hi, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate you allowing me to join. In answer to your question, what the functional classification review does is plots the GIS against the usage and make sure it's all correct. So it plots out your different pavement classifications from arterial down to residential and make sure we're looking at the correct data as far as classification is concerned.
Okay, so, but I'm still not sure, what kind of a report would we get out of that?
Not so much as a report as an integration of more precise data into the final deliverables. It's very important to know, number one, the usage of a road, and number two, the number of lanes, because there are different treatments that are prescribed and different survey methods actually. So we just go through line by line on your existing GIS and make sure that they're all categorized correctly as far as classification.
Sure, okay, so, I could see where that would be important, and would it, affect the prioritization?
Exactly. Yeah, you're always going to prioritize your more heavily traveled roads, which we call arterials and collectors. They're typically 4 lanes, not always. Sometimes they're divided, but that is a prioritization in the analysis.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Albertson?
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a question for somebody. Are these one-time costs? Like when we've paid them this year, now we pay this 121,000, are there recurring costs that come with this, or what's the status on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Albertson. To that point, I would say that, that this pavement management program is moldable. It's what we want to make it for our community. That's why when we set it up 4 years ago, we got what we did just to get to hit the ground running and to get a system in place. Now this year, as you're seeing, I'm proposing what the consultants proposed to us, and what I'm recommending are some add-ons to that. So these are coming at an additional cost. But conventionally, once you get that program set up, you would have a recurring fee for the update costs that, again, would happen about every 4 to 5 years or so. So right now, the update costs are $57,000 for the base updates, about every 4 to 5 years. And, depending on how our pavement management system is progressing, that could be stretched a little bit. Just from a professional standpoint, I wouldn't recommend going much longer than that, because your data tends to become obsolete if you wait too long, and then it costs all the more to get it updated later on. So staying on top of it is a key, but these are one-time costs for this year, and then 4 to 5 years out, we would expect to see some additional update costs to the system.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Councilman Vilhauer?
A couple of questions for you, Heath. One, I think you've probably already answered, and you and I have had some conversations behind the scenes. I assume you found the study from back in 2015 as being useful. I mean, I know there's times that by necessity something else jumps ahead of what's in the queue, but in general, this is useful information and usable information.
Yes, absolutely, and I think Rob, Street Superintendent, would attest to that, along with Justin, the Assistant City Engineer. It's a very, very useful steering document to help guide us with those projects year in and year out.
Okay. And then secondly, is there any overlap or integration with we're going through a transportation master plan right now conducted by the DOT, right? I mean, is there any overlap or coordination with that, or is this totally independent, separate from that?
Yes, it's somewhat independent and separate, but there are similar pieces of information in each. And one of them that Jeff just spoke to regarding the functional classification review is one of those that comes to my mind as having some overlap, because we have functional classifications identified in our master transportation plan as well. And I don't know, Jeff, if you want to speak to that as far as your guys' use of existing data like that, like transportation master plans, and how that would be considered in your work here for us?
Sure. I would need to look at the transportation plan, but typically the DOT transportation plan will cover all of the streets in and around the city that they have ownership of. Whereas the city plan is more the city-owned streets that they're responsible for the dollar for dollar maintenance of. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Well, our transportation master plan will update the entire city's planning for the entire street network within our city limits. So it would include a lot of these local streets, collectors, and arterials, as far as identifying them in a long-range planning perspective.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I understand. Yeah, that's kind of the core of this plan, because what we'll do is basically drive all of the streets, rank them from 0 to 100 with what we call a pavement condition index score, which is done to national standards. And then we prioritize that. The overarching problem Heath and his crew know exactly what they need to do on the roads. The problem is there's an intersection with budget on an annual basis. So they have to make some hard choices as to what gets rehabbed in a given year and what does not. What we do is set that priority by cost of deferral. So we look at, okay, given a X number of dollar budget, what's the most effective way to spend that? In other words, what will it cost the city the most to defer in a given year? So we're typically prioritizing streets that are drifting from one rehab category to a more expensive one, and making sure that those get done before they deteriorate into a more expensive rehab category.
To your point, Councilman Vilhauer, this work here that IMS is doing does dive a lot deeper than our transportation master plan would. But what we as staff would do is just make sure that the two documents are talking the same language, making sure that they're not providing contradictory information.
I guess my underlying question ultimately then is that we're not paying for a duplication of effort. Or should, another related question to that is, or should we be waiting for the final results of the transportation master plan before we undergo any more testing? So it sounds like they're pretty well independent, but I just want to make sure that the timing is right, that we're not duplicating costs here.
Yeah, no, great considerations. I would say they are independent enough that we wouldn't necessarily have to wait for one to perform the next.
Okay.
Great question, though.
Okay, thanks, Heath.
Councilman Roby?
Thank you. Heath, kind of a layperson question here. If you're working on a project and you're engineering a street or an intersection, what have you, and some of the supplemental information you've got is add-ons. If you don't have that information, you're going to have to send somebody out there to take pictures of it to see what it really is, or how do you handle that?
Not sure I completely follow the question, Councilman Roby.
Well, if I'm looking at like the GIS stuff. If you don't have
Yeah.
all the information in there, then you have to go out and physically look at the site.
True. Yeah, the more we can build our GIS database, the better we are served, I feel, in the community, because staff is all the more proficient with what they're trying to carry out. Having that information at our fingertips is usually saves us a lot of time and energy and effort. As you know, as we reference it in these meetings off and on, there's a lot of good, valuable information in there. So the more we can build that over time, the more robust that GIS information becomes, the more efficient we become and the services we perform. So this is just one way of plugging in more information to those maps, and really the sky's the limit when it comes to GIS. You can really expand and continue to expand year after year on the data that you've got in those maps.
We would never get to the point of designing a road without boots on the ground and survey for that purpose. And the IMS study is really looking at the condition of the asphalt and the subgrade and the physical characteristics of the roadway itself, whereas our transportation master plan is looking at traffic counts and volumes of cars moving, and where do the cars drive, where do the trucks go, what kind of road do we need, and it's future roads as well. This study is looking at the condition of our roads that exist today and helping us to prioritize which ones need rehabilitation first and what type of rehabilitation. Councilman Hoyer?
Heath, question for you. With us continuing to likely repeat studies like this, so we have our first set of data, we take this next set if we choose to acquire it, and then I would assume about 5 years later we'd potentially do this again. Does having this extra data help us to potentially start to predict trends that we might be seeing in some of our roads, maybe areas of town that might be more troublesome, and then maybe we can get ahead of problems before they can develop into further issues?
Yeah, if I could refer to Jeff on that question as well, just from his perspective from the pavement management system database use over time. Jeff, if you're comfortable fielding that?
Oh, sure. The biggest benefit for every study, it's critical to determine at what rate the pavement deteriorates, and that's different for every market. In other words, the street network in Watertown is going to behave completely differently than the street network in Arlington, Texas. So we have to determine how fast it deteriorates, and we build curves to show that deterioration for every type of pavement that you have. Now, in the first study, we don't really have any data to work with, historical. So we're making very educated guesses based on the data that we have for your neighbors. When we work with quite a few agencies in South Dakota, when we come in the second time, we can then vet those curves and get extremely precise with the deterioration of the different types of roads in Watertown. That's the biggest benefit. The second thing is, over 5 years, you have a lot of changes. You have changes to your budget. Heath and his crew are performing rehabs to streets. We may have inflation on materials cost. So every 4, 5, 6 years, it's just a good idea to come in and update all of the data and move forward fresh. Those are the two big benefits.
Does that help answer your questions,
Yeah, I
Councilman
think
Hoyer?
so. The biggest thing is just making sure that all this data speaks to itself a little bit so that they relate to each other. I think the metrics that we get from that are going to be really helpful. Just understanding what roads built when maybe prematurely failed, and things that we can maybe look out and just finesse and massage our process to be more efficient, maybe with how we go about it. Perhaps I know there's already seasons that we avoid building roads in and stuff like that, but maybe just in our process, asking that a builder hold off or something. But it's mainly just knowing that this data talks to itself, so we can actually get good metrics out of it.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Oh, Councilman Lallam?
Thank you, Mayor. On this right-of-way asset data collection and markings and sign database, I mean, what's the biggest benefit to that? I mean, it's obviously the largest dollar amount of an add-on. I'm just trying to figure out what the asset is.
Absolutely. No, great question. If I could defer to Street Superintendent Rob Bannon, he's on the line with us. That is information that I would anticipate he would utilize the most with his sign and signal technicians and his pavement marking crews. Rob, could you chime in on that a little bit? The benefit of having a comprehensive, accurate database of those systems?
Yeah, thanks, Heath. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, to have that information handy at our fingertips is really good for any of the projects we have going on or any of the mill and overlay that we do. Street markings is really important to be able to put back the same stuff. Currently, we do a lot of times when we have projects coming through, we'll go in the GIS and try to get as accurate information as we can on those. But I think that the information that these guys would provide would be more detailed for street markings, and then signage, of course, it'll be a top-notch database to keep track of our signage and what we have out there at our fingertips as well. We do have a database of information on our signage right now, but it's not top-notch. We're working on it, so it's a work in progress, I guess you could say.
Follow up.
Sure, go ahead.
Rob, on that one there, are you just have like on a spreadsheet type deal, an Excel spreadsheet for your signs and things of that nature?
It is, yep. Our signage right now, we have stickers on the back of our signs that we keep track of for a sign number, and then we keep a database of what it is, if it's a stop sign at a specific location. But a lot of that information is based, like if you have a stop sign at an intersection, that's easy to document. But if you have a no parking sign somewhere, that type of thing where it's 50 feet from a corner, you don't have an accurate location of it. That type of stuff would be what I'd be looking for, more accurate information of locations and things like that, and dates they were put up. We do keep that information, but it's a work in progress.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jeff. This is Mayor Karen. The right-of-way asset data collection for the pavement markings and signs database, would that be tied into the GIS as well? So if we wanted, for instance, to know all of the signs installed in the year 2003, we could sort it and show it graphically, or is it disconnected?
No, the deliverable for that is actually a personal geodatabase. that will sync with your GIS and provide imagery. So as we're collecting street data, we have the ability to mount 4 high-speed digital cameras in that collection vehicle. So we're taking imagery of all of your pavements as we're driving. What we do with those databases is we actually will go back and review frame by frame that imagery and plot the location with the help of some aerial photography, and then a whole host of attributes. We actually put out what's called a master asset list, which is basically everything that we're collecting. And then we link it to the image. So we show a picture of the sign, different attributes, including a condition rating, that all links into your GIS.
How would we use it?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons you really want to have that. Number one, it's a high dollar value asset that has to be maintained, and decisions have to be made in the same fashion as they do roads. You have to replace signs as they deteriorate. So it makes it a lot easier to get your arms around the dollar value of the investment. But the other thing is accountability. Especially for the signs and supports, and I stress this as much as I can, if you Google missing stop sign, about 2/3 of your results are going to be attorneys. Unfortunately, that seems to be a trend that just isn't going to stop. So it's very important to know where there should be a stop sign and there isn't. And if a stop sign is knocked down or unreadable or obstructed, it's critical on some of these databases to maintain that just from a public safety aspect.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hoyer?
I'm gonna just kind of ask a follow-up to that. So with you going around with the 4 high-speed cameras, does that like enable you to do almost like a mensurated grid, so you know exactly where it's at, and you kind of drop a pin GPS where every one of these is, and then there's, I guess, kind of, for lack of a better explanation, like a Google Street View of that asset?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And we currently have some of that already on our GIS where, I mean, if you could pull it up where we have the, you can get a view of the actual pavement at whatever your location is. Of course, it's a snapshot in time when that picture was taken. Anyone else? All right, thank you, everyone. I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rob.
I appreciate you having me on.
You bet. Okay, we're on to old business, and item A under old business is update discussion on stormwater utility implementation. Heath, want to kick this off?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So last week, my days blended together pretty well last week. I think it was Thursday.
Yes,
We had,
was.
the Watertown Municipal Utilities had their board meeting last week, and they provided some follow-up to my December 28th presentation regarding introducing the stormwater utility fee onto the city's utility billing system. The utility board decided unanimously not to allow the inclusion of the stormwater utility fee onto the utility bill. So that brings us to what the city's next step should be in relation to getting the stormwater utility implemented. If that is, obviously if that is such a desire of the council as a whole. I did want to share a couple quick talking points on the heels of municipal utilities action. What had happened there is, if you recall, utilities had asked for us to pay a 1/6 portion of the utility billing costs. Those utility billing costs were estimated to be just over $1 million annually. So that equated to about $185,000 request from utilities for us to plug this into the utility bill. After analyzing that, that ended up being a good chunk of our $800,000 to $1 million revenue of the stormwater utility specifically. So we didn't feel it was necessarily fair or appropriate to hit that one utility that heavily of an expense right off the bat when implementing it. So what our counter proposal was at the end of December was to pay a proportional share of the utility billing costs, the annual $1 million, based on revenues for each utility. So the electric, the water, the gas, the wastewater, the solid waste, and the stormwater would all pay a proportional share of that $1 million dependent upon the revenue. And it'd all be based on the revenues that each one generated. So what that equated to was about $150,000 city contribution towards that $1 million annual billing cost. So we went from $185,000 ask down to about $150,000 that we recommended, splitting 3 ways amongst our 3 utilities that would be on that bill. I wanted to just point that out as a recap for the council on where we were with those billing fees and what we had last presented to the utility board. Also just wanted to make a couple quick notes of clarity just to try to clear up any misinformation that might be out there. Now, the stormwater utility, if it's established, isn't solely for the purposes of storm sewer pipes and maintenance. There's a little bit of a misnomer out there that it's just strictly for inlets and storm sewer pipes. When in fact, a stormwater utility, if it is implemented, would benefit the city's entire collective stormwater system, which includes several surface conveyance channels that we have, one of which we just worked on up in the Cherry Drive area. All the creeks and drainage ways, the river for that matter, bank stabilization, mucking of sediments, clearing of vegetation, all those things that are required throughout the year on all the surface conveyance channels would be benefited by a stormwater utility. It also does benefit the storm sewer pipe and inlets and the hard infrastructure that's in the ground that conveys stormwater. That is definitely one of the components that receive benefits to this utility. But just wanted to, again, impress upon not only the council but the general public for their knowledge that a stormwater utility being established is to benefit the collective system as a whole. So anywhere there's rooftops, driveways, sidewalks, parking lots, where the rain now hits and runs off quicker and carries sediment or debris or other things with it, that's what a city's stormwater utility helps to address and manage from year in and year out. So I just wanted to share that information for public record, and then move on to, what's our next steps here. After talking internally briefly about this, we've kind of always known, our other alternative is to assess this stormwater utility fee onto the property taxes. And that is another option that's utilized by several communities throughout South Dakota and is a viable option for Watertown to do. So really the question before that I wanted to maybe get a green light on from the Public Works Committee was whether you'd like us to proceed in that fashion to start researching the timeline, meeting the deadlines, and bringing forth the next action items for the council that they would have to take in order to accomplish that. Again, the revenues anticipated for this utility is about $800,000 to $1 million, roughly, and that is by implementing a flat $3 a month rate to every residence in town, and then a calculated rate for all the commercial and industrial lots that would end up being more than that $3 a month, some significantly more depending on the amount of runoff that they generate. But those would all be calculated based on calculations from our consultant for the commercial and industrial properties. With that, I'll stand by for questions. I know Kristen Bobzine's online and Matt Roby, the finance officer, and the city attorney. And they've been partnering with me and the mayor as well on this project. So we'd all be glad to help answer any questions that you might have.
Councilman Hoyer?
I guess, Heath, my biggest question with this would just be these additional funds, do you feel they would assist quite a bit with just flood mitigation measures? I mean, it sounds like a lot of these waterways, if we're maintaining them more appropriately and even, more bank work on them, even areas that maybe traditionally flood, if we actually built up the wall a little bit on the sides, maybe it would assist with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The localized flooding and some of the smaller events, sometimes that is a result of lack of maintenance. If you notice, I've referred to these a couple times, but Rob's done a great job with his street crews up in the northeast part of town, and then locations throughout town. The ones that stand out to me are the northeast side of town, where you can see the piles of sediment along some of the surface drainage ways that they've mucked out of those channels that's accumulated over the last 5, 10, maybe over 10 years in some cases. And if those aren't kept up for year in and year out or on an occasional basis, obviously that sediment, that dirt, as it builds up in those channels, it compromises the water carrying capacity of that channel, hence causing backup and ponding and flooding and things that we don't want to see in any of our neighborhoods. So those efforts absolutely are benefited by these types of funds. And the other important thing that this program like this does, it frees up funding for other things. You know, there's a lot of things on the wish list or the want list or the needs list here in the community. And by having another source of revenue like this specific for stormwater management, it simply helps free up some of those funds to go towards other efforts as well.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Just a few questions and comments. First of all, I want to thank Heath for, primarily Heath as kind of the spearheader of this, going back, the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, and especially in negotiations with the utility department. This has been a back and forth discussion going back. I remember sitting in a meeting back in, I think, December of 2019, and Heath gave an outstanding presentation at our December meeting. But it was unfortunate that we didn't have any kind of chance for any kind of input at the meeting last week. The feeling was that there's enough chance on our part for discussion, and it was cut off that we had no chance for input whatsoever. Even after the mayor tried to interject and have some conversation, we were cut off and voted down 5-0. So I don't think the ultimate vote was probably a big surprise. I think we were somewhat frustrated, and I think the term that was used in the paper is terribly disappointed in the way the process worked itself out on last Thursday. But anyway, that being as it is now, moving forward from there, I just want to remind my colleagues up here that we've had this conversation going back again over a year ago as far as the advisability and feasibility of implementing this fee. And I think we'd all agreed that it was something that we did want to pursue, and to the point that we had a draft of an ordinance in front of us some time back. And I'm assuming that will be coming again now, an ordinance as far as for our consideration, the public having a chance to weigh in on that. I think where we got hung up, that ordinance was again how we were going to collect it. But anyway, that will be coming back before us if we do in fact move forward with this. I'm seeing nodding heads here, so we will see that at some point near future then if we want to continue to go down this road. I guess you've sort of answered a question, but I guess I'll ask Kristen or Matt if they have any better insight as far as what the timing is, if we do need to get on the property tax rolls, what the timing is for getting that done. Obviously, nothing will be collected this year, but what is the timing for getting it on the rolls for next year's property tax payments? Any better idea on that? Anyone?
Matt, I think is.
Yeah, I can chime in there. The option of putting on the property tax rolls is essentially the same process that Kristen follows every year, including the dollar amount that we would send over to the county in the appropriations ordinance, and then sending it over just like we send over our property tax by, I believe it's October 1st every year. And so it's actually not, our ordinance that we would approve would spell that out. We would follow that same process, and then we would simply send it over every year. Of course, the list would change slightly every year as property uses perhaps change and annexations occur, so the list may grow. But it's just simply sent over every year. After that ordinance is approved, it doesn't have to go through that formal assessment, quote unquote, assessment process every year. So that would be the process. So as far as timing goes, if we approve something here in the near term, it could still be sent over for collection in 2022.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Kristen, did you want to add anything to that?
I didn't have anything to add. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions while we're talking about it? Councilman Holeen?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, Heath. I know that you addressed how every house in some way or another is going to contribute to the stormwater flows, but it seems to me, with my non-engineering brain, that some houses, based upon where they're at or how they're constructed, might contribute more directly, immediately, and possibly more than some other houses, just possibly based on size of the yard or the housing development that they're in. Would it be even feasible to have like certain grades as far as the cost on these houses?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, Councilman. And I guess the simplest response to that is that we, internally had directed our consultant to try to keep the system as simple as possible. We didn't want to get into calculating areas of percentage of imperviousness for every residential lot in town. Some communities do go to that level of detail, and they hone in on the exact area of the rooftop and the driveway and the sidewalk. And but for Watertown's purposes, we were trying to keep it as simple to administer as possible, just given our staffing levels that we have. If we add more tiered components into it, which is certainly possible, my main concern with that would be the time it would take to manage and administer the program year in and year out. And you would have to appoint staff and have enough staff available to address any fluctuations in those exact calculations on a per lot basis for all the residential lots in town. You can imagine that could get pretty cumbersome over in a pretty quick hurry with as many residential lots as we have. So what we had opted to do or tried to do with the consultant this far is just to put it out there as simple as possible with a flat rate per residence and not have to get involved to the level of detail in calculating the amount of impact on a per lot basis for residential purposes anyway. Does that help answer your question, Councilman?
The largest number of individual bills will go to single-family dwellings, and that's also the lowest cost. And we'd have to raise up the fee considerably to add another staff member to handle not just figuring it out, but handling all the objections to it. Like, well, I don't have that much square feet of impervious surface. You know, I think you should reduce my number. And if everyone is paying the same flat fee, there's no argument there on who has a bigger patio or a wider driveway or a greater roof area. And it does seem a little unfair when you look at a tiny little bungalow with a big yard compared to a small lot that's almost all house. But in the big picture, the fee is averaged out, and every person pays a lower amount without having to spend a lot of time engineering it and calculating each person's individual contribution. And this is, our consultant advised us on this decision too, and it's something every community faces. Other questions? Okay, well, I think we can move on. Is there any other old business? All right, any new business? All right, we will be going into executive session this evening in order to discuss and consult with legal counsel on a personnel matter. We do not expect to take action upon coming out, so I'll look for a motion to go into executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2. Have a motion by Hoyer and a second by Holeen. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. So we need to log out and log into the executive session meeting, those that are online.